Beyond these pages lies a world of gods, monsters, betrayal, and impossible power.
That specific name, says the tutorial tester. He's surprised while a boy approaches. He was about to say something about the test, but the second the goblins spawned a figure past and beheaded both creatures in a single strike. Hyuga was confused. Who's that guy? See, today is the player qualification tutorial day, and until now he's unimpressed with every single attendance. They all suffer too much to kill some mere goblins and can't barely hold on. A 2 versus 1. This guy is even scared of going to the next stage and decides to quit. The best and can now reach the round 20, which is okay. So what the hell is this? Why, in a minute he's seeing a sea of dead monsters. The boy keeps advancing rounds faster than even he could follow. His cuts are too sharp and his movements too skilled. Something beyond a master swordsman. Test 49 came and the ground shipped the floor began to crack. But before we have to understand who is this boy. He used to run the strongest team and being the rank 1 guild master. So why is everyone dead on ground while he's barely being able to hold on and it's about to die? He's been friend with this blonde guy called Kyojo for the past 10 years. And even gave him a rare legendary item to protect him on this dangerous raid. All so they could succeed in the floor 8. But when the boss appeared and Narukami and his teammates went to fight it, Kyojo and his goons smiled. The perfect chance to get rid of the top guild had arrived. Why they were distracted fighting and this cute healer was giving her best. The fake friend suddenly appeared from behind and stabbed her. But why this guy is betraying Narukami if they are all trying to save the world? 10 minutes fast forward and Kyoji shouts that he hated how much they've helped him. He hated being in the shadow of Narukami and his top 1 Blue Eyes guild. But today that changes. That's what Blonde thinks, but he's not ready for what's to come. A lid hits the floor and a boy pops out of a trash bin, asking himself if this is Earth. He's now hustly Subaru at level 1 who has memories of people saying that he's a loser that don't come closer to the real Subaru that died 20 years ago. He then sees online info about the Blue Eyes guild, and strangely still exists. And people are saying to carry his pass. Well, then one saying to carry it is none other than Kyojo himself. The revenge target is obvious, but he's just a level 1, while this guy has all his past power plus 20 extra years of leveling and farming. He promises that he will make this bastard remember who's the real top 1. But how is he going to fight the guy that now owns the Hunter world? The envy of Blonde has its roots. And the final battle when the boss used its first roar strike, Narukami was able to stop it with a single strike. While his companions drowned him in praises, Kyojo envy at the side Omi grew stronger. That day and moment he stabbed the healer and smiled on her death, Subaru was being attacked by the boss. It felt as if Kyojo was attacking out of anger, but if we roll back, we discovered that that same guy used B in Narukami's team. But he left it saying that he had a new plan to become stronger. The plan was killing him. So now we're back, and the question is how a level 1 is going to kill the strongest guy on Earth. Plan A was to find some info on the old players of Blue Eyes. So he went to his own memorial while everyone prayed with their Subaru's mask on. He saw a glowing flower above the casket. He rushed, grabbed it, and recognized that this was one of his old teammates' skill. In the day of the last battle, he used a cyclone skill to push the bodies of friends always. So maybe they had a chance to survive. But if they are alive after all this, are they still truly his allies? With no power, rushing things is the worst option. So before any contact, he need to get his strength back. Sword in hands, cause in 2 days the player qualification tutorial will begin. The get part of Kyojo being lag is that he can be killed. Eventually. Now we're back at the test day. The moment he achieved the step 49, the place trembled, the floor crackled. Hyuga shouted for him to run. Was he thinking he was Narukami's super room for some reason? The Goblin King spun, furious seeing the sea of green bodies. Baudi asked for him to forfeit, and the boss advanced. Hosoi dropped his sword, grabbed iron nails from a mace at the floor and hurled them directly at the boss' eyes. The creature staggered back, and the moment it struck down, Hosoi sidestepped. This precision came from training with this goth babe. But that was my training partner. I would also be that precise. 1 to the jugular and multiple to the body. The unbeatable king was already exhausted, and like nothing it fell face first to the ground. Hosoi casually grabbed his sword and finished him off. He was the first one to defeat the Goblin King and clear step 50. However, Subaru was very worried about having such a monster in the tutorial. Anyway, the boy began to level up like crazy and also gain access to the tutorial shop. He had 2,500 credit points, but it was his first time seeing the shop. He had several things he could buy with the credit point, and some things are really good. For example, the nameless demon's sword that cost 1,000 points. Subaru felt like buying it, but its special ability drained his life. Another sword was the sacred sword Miranda, which cost 1,400 points. Since this won relief for TE, it was a better choice than just focusing on destructive power. However, Subaru knew that neither choice would be good if he didn't think more. Anyway, he was surprised because he was deciding between 2, but saw that there were more things. He could thus buy the appearance bent, which cost 1,400, but removed the bad effects of items and abilities. Seeing this, he didn't think twice about buying it, and along with the bet, he bought the demon's sword, since he wouldn't lose life anymore. Subaru was quite satisfied with the choice he made. The bold man understood the logic of the purchase, but commented that he still didn't understand one thing. He asked why Subaru bought the bet, because it could be useless in the future. Then, Superu questioned whether he really needed to share everything he thought, and, naturally, Heir further beat disrespected. In any case, the bald man accepted to let it go this time and acknowledged that he had nothing. In the end, Superu only thought that he didn't expect the kid to become an instructor. A long time ago, Heir was a fan, and he went to ask for an autograph. Superu bluntly said he didn't have time for that. Then, the boy begged, almost crying, and said his name was Heir. Apparently, time had not been kind to make him bald so early. Anyway, Superu said he didn't want to answer anything and asked for the results for Made a Super. Without hearing anything, Heir said he'd teach the boy to be a good citizen, and asked if Superu would join the Knights Guild, but he replied no. Courier panicked and tried to say how lucky the boy was to have an instructor guiding him. However, the protagonist simply went upstairs, leaving the bald man alone and sad. Seconds later, on the second floor called the Starting City, it seemed like a fair was happening. Everyone was selling their goods, but Superu was worried. He had gained an impossible chance, a second opportunity to change everything. Having lived this once, Superu needed to do things better than before. This was for his comrade who must be waiting for him and to finish his revenge. In the Starting City, there was a private training room. There, it was possible to test skills or equipment, and it was free to visit at any time. The receptionist pointed to training room number 1, but the protagonist asked to go to the 5th. The old man tried not to let the novice waste money, but Superu insisted. Thus, he shouted nervously that whatever happened was his responsibility and paid 50 credits. In this place, the harder the nerve, the greater the difficulty. So, it was natural to offer an easier place for beginners. However, the protagonist wasn't really a beginner. He was well prepared for the 5th floor. After entering, Superu grabbed the new sword, and it recognized the boy as its owner. All stats were temporarily increased, and the problem of draining life and stamina appeared. However, the greed skill kicked in, temporarily restoring a portion. Apparently, its level 1 wasn't enough to nullify everything. Then, the nameless demon sword began to absorb more and give back every stats. And at one point, the protagonist reached his limit. Without thinking twice, he used 10,000 credits to level up the skill to level 2. Now that it was a rank E skill, it could better withstand the sword's downside, although it still consumed life force. Once again, the protagonist's stats increased. Then, he ran to do the first test, throwing himself into the traps of the room. After a few minutes, the receptionist was already asleep when Superu passed by the front desk. Waking up suddenly, he wondered if he was dreaming, because it seemed like that young man from before had just passed right in front of him. The receptionist got up trying to remember who it was, since only 10 minutes had passed. To be sure, he went to room number 5 to knock on the door, and he entered when he heard nothing, then was more surprised than ever, because the room was so destroyed that it looked like there had been an earthquake. The next day, Superu stretched and complained because he felt his body as hard as a rock. The good side was that it was a weak demon sword, because a normal one would have been even worse. The negative effects had already worn off, thanks to which Superu managed to use a bit of the power. With his current status, he couldn't even hold a demon sword. The compatibility of the skill he bought with the sword was great, and Superu was already thinking that the greed bet would help with electric skills too. The crowd was how he would improve it, because after leveling up, he was already broke. Having money problems made Superu lament how messed up he was. Anyway, a person on the street comments to his audience that he feels a lot of nostalgia being there. He is a streamer who, after just receiving 1,000 credits from a guy named Alexandri, pours coffee on his own head. Superu immediately thinks that this guy is crazy, but he looks online and finds a news article stating that 1-in-3 players is a streamer. Currently, there is a system where you stream or earn points in Rue Turn. Suddenly, some rise talking about the boy being there too. He says it's funny to find Superu in there. The protagonist starts to feel his body strange, as if he didn't like the person. This guy asks is Superu just going to ignore him, and the hero realizes he is afraid of him. The protagonist explains, trembling, that he also managed to get here. Then the guy sits down saying he is screwed because a loser like him managed to pass the tutorial. He confessed that he was hoping Superu would die to the goblins. Before waking up in the trash, the true owner of his body was being bullied. Isash that he did this because he was trash. He said the boy's name annoyed him and that he couldn't even do what he asked. Superu said the credits he earned weren't enough to do it. However, he got kicked in the stomach when he tried to talk. He also ripped open a food bag and told the boy to live there in the dump because if he left, he would learn a good lesson. These memories made the hero understand why he was inside a trash can. Anyway, Isaac starts bragging that he made it to level 20 and that he is Reinhardt's son. He also says he learned a rank B skill, which is a max that he can get in the tutorial. So Superu just compliments the boy and warns that he's leaving. But in this case, the blonde asks the hero to take advantage of him, leaving to buy a coffee and some snacks for him. Since Superu doesn't respond, he starts to get furious. He asks, almost exploding with rage, if the boy has gone crazy from out of bang right away. However, it wasn't like Superroom had any credits left. Anyway, Hisak tells him to sit down, but the hero really didn't want to waste time avenging the body's owner. He was going to leave without causing problems, but the blonde grabbed the protagonist by the arm. Hisak angrily asks if Supero wants to find out what he does when disrespected, but the protagonist responds in kind, telling him to let go if he wants to live. The blonde says, almost bursting with hatred, that Supero can't be so full of himself. Supero just thinks he can't create a scene in front of all these people. But suddenly, the blonde starts laughing uncontrollably. He asks if the protagonist is scared because he knows he has a weakling. He also says that he must have barely escaped dying in the tutorial, but even though he is feeling good, he warns that whenever he wants, he can make him disappear without anyone noticing. Then he leaves, telling his friend to take care, which irritates Superroom for still being called a friend by Hisak. It is said that there are 2 ways for players to get stronger. The first is by completing challenges. Passing the tower challenges and receiving rewards while continuing to level up makes the player strong. He needs to pay credits, but Lakesa doesn't die, just lives his manga in progress. The second method is hunting monsters outside safe zones or clearing special dungeons. It's much faster than challenges, but it's also real, so if you die there, you die in real life. Now Superroom was in the Orc dungeon, a pretty dangerous place for players, but he thought it was better to take risks than to advance slowly, because the dangerous also means it gives better rewards. In his player kit device, Super checks him news again. A certain Noragami Superu at 80,000 keep roll to raid to 4th floor. For Nakamans, is an RA 8th time he was trying. But seeing someone with such a similar name and wearing his mask irritates Superu. Out of nowhere, someone sends him 20,000 credits, so the boy thanks them. Apparently, it was possible to send missions to streamers too. 3 other viewers send more missions that are, for example, prove you can do it. Unlike the fraud, the protagonist starts trembling with envy, because, while he was there taking risks, the copy was making money easily. Superroom really gets irritated and continues wanting a string for a few seconds, but he quickly stands up to continue doing what he has to do. He pulls out the sword he carefully stored inside an orc and prepares himself as a whole gang of them starts to arrive. Among them was also the orc general, who was the strongest and the boss. Even without the poison spikes from last time, Superroom claims to have something better. The demon's sword absorbs the protagonist's health and boosts his stats. Then he jumps over the smaller ones, saying he doesn't have time for them, and speeds like lightning towards the boss. In 1 second, the protagonist reaches his head, and in a second, he cuts the monster very well. Thus, he completes the dungeon and, not being foolish, later grabs an ancient mask. Acting like the others would be a good way to make money. So he put on the mask, thinking he would just do what he already knew. After all, among all these streamers copying the hero, he was the real Subaru. At the entertainment company Saturn, Narukami Cool starts a stream and a girl watches it. However, at one point she screams in anger and scares her colleague, making him jerk out of his chair. She's outraged that 5 people quinquire a dungeon. The friend asks what's wrong because the first ones were supposed to earn 1,000 credits. Then he explains that some guy named Subi Kichi messed everything up and that he might be a fan of Superroom because, while the real one was missing, the others were using his name. For her, despite living office, the strings were dead because everyone was imitating Superroom. She also thinks it's disrespectful for these incompetents to risk their lives without knowing the basics. The friend asks why the girl gave up on the tower to work there then. After thinking, she replied that it was boring. In fact, the friend also should be talking much because he also gave up. He knew she had started climbing to meet Narukami Ko and then lost motivation. Anyway, the girl screams that an excellent kid has appeared. However, since he was also wearing the mask, both nearly fainted. The boy asks why his colleague was watching such a lousy stream from the 2nd floor. However, she admits that whenever she sees someone wearing that mask, she gets a little curious. And she also charges the guy 1,000 credits for losing a bet. At the entrance of the 2nd floor, the protagonist thinks the place is nothing special. However, knowing there was a viewer made him feel a bit pressured. The girl on the account Loop Money asked if it was his first attempt, so Superroom replied that it was. Loop Money said it would be better if he didn't stream and focus on the first time, but there was already a bat monster there. But even with the coming of him full force, Superroom grabbed its head and slammed it to the ground like a sack of flour. Then the protagonist asked if Love was still worried. The goal of the floor is to clear the dungeon and escape alive. Another person enters the sphere, but the girl keeps insistent and the protagonist shouldn't agree. So he thanks her but warns that there won't be any problems, because he also prefers to get stronger without relying on others. Obviously, everyone thinks he's crazy, and at least his name helps attract an audience. In the first match, a land creature goes straight for the hero's leg. However, he draws his sword and defeats the monster, saying that for now, he will rush quite a bit. He defeats the mud merman and earns 2 achievement points. After that merman, several of those giant bats appear flying, but the protagonist casts them all down to the fierce lines of his sword. None of the viewers managed to see what just happened. Defeating those bats also gave 2 points, and the merman 4 points. That's why the hero said that if you pay attention to the sound, you could notice how many were coming and from where they were coming. And as the viewers were very surprised, Superhue said he would talk more. It still wasn't enough. He wanted to earn as many achievement points as possible. People were debating whether he was right to be quiet or was about to take a big hit. And it seems that way because the protagonist arrives in a place that looks like the bat's nest. When he notices Superhue there, the chat becomes very worried. But one person leaves a mission of 100 credits to the protagonist if he kills them all. The people think the guy is trolling, but Superhue thanks for the 100 credits. Back at the streaming company, the boy shouts asking what his colleague is doing, focused on that. However, he apologizes, and even so, she doesn't pay attention, as she is glued to the hero's screen. The boy asks what she is so interested in. Then, she warns that something is different. He starts to say that he will pay the debt, but the girl says that's nothing. In fact, she had only been paying attention to the protagonist until now. The boy really can't understand, but it made sense, because he was exploding all the monsters alone. So, that habit of paying attention to those wearing the mask paid off. In the past, Superhue was praised because, even when he was countered, his breathing and focus remained the same. To others, his technique seemed light all the time, as if he already knew what the enemy was going to do. Then, the protagonist thought for a bit but replied that he had no idea he was doing anything, and it had to be explained that normal people couldn't imitate him. Shiguru also found it strange at first, and then Subaru realized that the key was making eye contact to make decisions. The one-eyed bats always attack by lunging their heads forward. Therefore, the more they have, the more openings they show, and Subaru takes advantage of this, using one to cut them all at once. For the viewers, the explanations were like, if you move your foot, you can walk. In the end, Lube Money reminds the boy not to forget to collect the credits. But he fiddles a lot with the player kit and stays silent for a good while, until he finally admits that he doesn't know how to accept. The viewers can't believe he's so clueless, but Lube helps the protagonist. So, the boy doesn't waste time and heads straight for the next objective. At the student company, the girl screams with happiness. She says this is very bad, but her face showed she was loving it. As the boy complains, she asks if he has ever seen anything like this before. He comments that the second 4 isn't exactly Eevee, but the girl disagrees that this makes the hero any less amazing. She becomes so dazzled that she starts to believe it's destiny. And she also accidentally guesses that the boy is the reincarnation of Narukami Superu, like a man was. When the subject is Superu, the girl gets dizzy just talking about him, but the friend named Saigen cuts her off before she starts thinking about going after the protagonist. That was exactly what she wanted to do, but Saigen was thinking like an investor. He said that if they talked about this to the boss, they would get scolded, so the two argued. But Lube gave up just for now, because she can keep watching the fury to live stream. Finally, the protagonist is in the most important area of the dungeon. There was already the final place to complete it. Then, he leaned against the gates, and they opened by themselves, revealing a monster that was sleeping inside. That monster was a warrior wolf named Greg, the boss of the floor. The mission's objective was to earn the respect of the warrior wolf through a test. The system never said this was a monster to be hunted. It was a guardian, but someone offered 3,000 credits if he could defeat the wolf. In the protagonist's reality, but a monster's quite large, so he could worried. In the end, the monster started to move little by little until it got up from the ground and began to talk to our hero. The first thing the wolf asks is if the protagonist is really alone there. Then, the hero asks him to check if he wants. Greg admits that he finds him interesting and that he smells like a very good warrior. The wolves of the warrior tribe can differentiate scents, and scents that reveal what a person is. Basically, in a second, the wolf gives permission for Superroom to continue advancing, but the hero apologizes and informs him that his objective is graying, which makes the wolf quite confused. Super explains that he has a mission to kill him, and having sensed the smell, Greg is able to understand. Back at Satin, the two workers go to talk to the boss. Then the man named John Tail types on the computer and asks about the size of the protagonist's audience. Seigen Shiley says it's about 20 people, but Love interrupts and proudly comments that it has already surpassed 30. The boss asks if the two are joking with him. The girl's real name is Hatsuka, and she gets scolded for not bringing Segun with Potentia. The boss believes it would be better for her to become a streamer because she's quite skilled, but the girl simply ignores it and informs that Subaru already has 40 people live. Back in the dungeon, the wolf prepares to defend itself, and the protagonist tries not to think and just act. He pulls out his demon sword and focuses to stay calm, even though it's his first time. The monster leaves to attack the hero with great speed, and he defends himself at the last second. Greg pulls out his sharp claws and tries to slash the boy. It starts to be push clock, and realizes that the enemy is quite shy. As he was already thinking, defeating him with brute force was impossible, but he had another idea for this and began to focus on dodging for now. Greg praises the protagonist, even though he says he has no chance against him. but the hero strikes the monster's claws at the right moment to make a perfect defense. Unfortunately, he ends up with his back against a wall, so the monster says he had a bit of fun in this fight and tells the boy to say goodbye. When Greg attacked, Subaru focused everything on fleeing beneath the warrior wolf. As he noticed the wolf's attack pattern, he made the monster hit the wall and get stuck so he could attack. Subaru wasted no time and made several cuts on the wolf, until he delivered the final blow that ended the fight. In the end, Greg doesn't mind and praises Subaru's talent once again, then falls defeated to the ground. All of the protagonist's skills level up and he earns 500 achievement points. The chat goes wild, and he earns and receives a reward of 3,000 credits from the mission. Now, with 3,150 credits and 618 achievement points, the door to the next level opens. But when he enters, a bunch of element option messages appear in front of him. There were about 16, and the number was according to the player's talent. If the protagonist didn't choose the Thunder path there, he would have to change his name. So he chose and was teleported to the next level. Back in Suiten, now the game turns and everyone gets as excited as the girl. Hatsuka says that already 6 of people led and this is net neural. Then the boss agrees that it's impressive because he also defeated the wolf. Still, Subarum's a novice and it was risky to invest in him. But in this case, Hatsuka asked to make a bet with John. She said that if Subarum failed to conquer the thunder, she and her friend would go 5 years without receiving. Season shouts immediately that he doesn't agree with this, but John thinks he has nothing to lose. Only Subaru had managed to get the thunder so far, but Hatsuka was confident, so John agrees to hire the hero with he can, while the girl covers so far his mouth. After choosing his element, the protagonist goes to the start of the thunder path, but when he arrives, someone pushes him away shouting to be careful. That person barely saves the boy and herself because there was a dangerous giant there with a club. The young man shouts what the protagonist is doing and if he wants to die. Then a system message appears telling him to defeat the giant of fragment. No one can understand why such a monster is appearing in his place. This was a giant that should only appear in the second half of the challenge, so the appearance let the killing strength had changed something. The giant slams the ground with its weapon, but the protagonist manages to dodge somehow. That young man from before keeps saying they barely got away, but the protagonist focuses on finishing this quickly before they try to interfere. The giant leaves an opening when it raises its weapon, so the hero dodges, and when the monster strikes the ground, he uses its arm to jump very high, until he reaches the monster's head and goes for its neck, and, in a neck area, he plunges the sword and ends the fight without even breaking a sweat, telling the giant to be quiet, would even need a sweat because after being defeated, it would stay silent forever. When the giant is defeated, the system announces that the 4th stage has been cleared. The protagonist's level increases along with other stats, and he gains an item called Giant's Heart. That boy who tried to help the hero is confused, just like the people in the broadcast. The young man started to speak more politely after seeing that scene. He also asked who Subaru was, so he said he was the one who came to defeat the giant. Sometime later, in the city, the protagonist spends some time looking at what they are sitting in the plater kit. Everyone likes the city item he won, which is probably rare. Then, as he is also curious, he tells everyone they will look together. He takes out of his subspace the giant's heart, which is a rare ring that increases vitality and regeneration. He also gets an armor called Thunderclap, which has thunder power. If you were named Love and Urukama, Subarum donates 5,000 credits for Subarum to get the thunder. So he thanks and several other people also put a lot of credits into this mission, which makes the protagonist even more motivated to succeed. But some make people so eager. Subarum began to recognize only now that he had been special in the past. Finally, suddenly someone knocked on his room door. That boy from before entered along with a blonde knight in armor. He apologizes for the delay and informs that he brought the captain of the night village, Sir Peleus. The two greet each other and start talking about the giant attacks. The young man explains that the knights stay alert 24 hours a day, and that the citizens do too. That's why he received Subaru so poorly. This time was tax, because the protagonist protected lives while he was away. Hallis thanks him. But the hero says he only did what he had to do. Peleus is the face of the village. He is a brave knight who faces the giant race. Changing the subject, the knight comments that they have already found the giant chief, and that they want to risk their lives to end this once and for all. Then the two bowed to the protagonist, asking him to help save the village. Everyone in the chat comments that they don't want Peleus to die. But Super remembers that, according to the story, in the next stage, the night doesn't end well. Anyway, he next the gory to lift his head. Instead to understand, he says he will help with everything he can. Thus, the knight thanks him, and the 5th stage begins. By late afternoon, a bunch of warriors go with the protagonist to the giant chief's location. Then he looks at the player kit. It was full of comments, and the views were increasing. But finally, the knight ordered the group to stop advancing because they could already see the body of a giant lying ahead, and that was the body of a chief of the giants they were after. Peleus agreed to go ahead to draw attention while the hero stayed behind. However, the protagonist stops him before he can go do something foolish. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking, making everyone there hold on to avoid falling. Then the hero warns that thing is already awake. When the monster looks at the group, a bunch of giants emerge from the ground and start chasing them. It's hard to understand why there suddenly is an army there. Peleus feels there's no way to fight back. Then the worst scenario begins as warriors are captured and devoured by those abominations. All of this in front of the others who will be next. With a psychopathic smile of their faces, Peleus shouts immediately for everyone to retreat to the base of the mountain. When the disaster starts, some knights are in shock, and others try to keep their composure. One of them loses his senses because he sees his brother being killed. Then Peleus shouts for everyone to run, saying it's in order. He tells the guys to think of their families in the village because if they die there, it will be the end. In the end, only Peleus and Falcon remain on the front line, but the protagonist also stands firm without moving a foot back. The blonde shouts that he needs to run too and leave the knights another bad. But the protagonist says that he is the one who should be saying that. He asks why the blonde isn't running and explains that he won't be able to fight at full strength while the knight is there. Peleus tries to say that he can't run and leave a foreigner to handle it alone, but the protagonist insists, so the blonde goes out to try to gather some reinforcements, and since he owes his life to him, he hopes Superroom comes back safely. The giants all stand up, focusing on the protagonist, but he doesn't let himself be attacked first and starts running. He shouts that he will be the opponent of the monsters and quickly cuts the leg of one of them. Then he cuts another giant that was also nearby to reach him. The monsters begin to look more at Superroom because in the blink of an eye, he had already defeated two. Even if that was just a test, the hero didn't want to be the one left behind. So he continued on the battlefield and defeated two more monsters with one attack. Swinging a sword nonstop, he sends another one to the sky, and the demon's sword continues to absorb energy. Superroom starts to get tired, so he runs to clear a path and find the chief soon, using the bodies of the giants to propel himself forward. He jumps over several smaller monsters and lands on another, but he doesn't stop. Superroom keeps jumping from giant head to giant head, and his equipment helps his stamina. He doesn't hit it to find a chief, and had a leap of fit, he managed to spot him in the midst of it all. The chief also seems happy to kill the protagonist. Silveroo becomes more worried because if he doesn't finish the fight now, he will die. So, while the monster prepares an attack, he hopes it works. Silveroo snaps his fingers to activate the thunderclap ability of the armor. The thunder crips the giants, but what drives them crazy is the sound, so they all start thrashing around. Since even the boss can escape this, the protagonist jumps over him, and not missing the chance, drives the sword into the giant's neck. It was such a quick move that the monster couldn't react, so it just fell backward, and the system notified that Superoo, all the protagonist's stats increased significantly, and the chat is left in awe. For Superoo, if this were a normal manga, the protagonist would strike a quote pose, with a rather restraining bod, and the greed bet could no longer restore stamina. Even after clearing this stage, the monsters do not disappear until the end of the exam. Continuing now was a situation the protagonist was not prepared for, as he had almost fallen there. However, since stage 5 was completed, the sky closed, and a giant black thunder fell on Superroom from the clouds. At the same time, everything is happening. In a cabin in the middle of the forest, Rina spends some time sitting watching the player kid. Shigeru arrives and asks what she's doing. Then she's sitting tending the plays. Sugar agrees that Rina should enjoy because soon the end will come for them. When she tries to talk seriously, her friend ignores her. Then the girl becomes curious to see what the other is watching that is so interesting. Rina shows that she is watching the live stream of a guy named Narukami Subaru. But just by Shigeru suggesting he might be the leader, Rina gets irritated. She says he is just an annoying streamer who is on the second floor. And she remembers what her friend said. If Superyu had survived, Kazuki would be screwed by now. Rina knows the leader is dead. It wants her friend to accept it too. But she disagrees. Rina shouts, asking how long she thinks the hero will hide. But Shigeru responds by asking the same thing, if they are just going to keep watching too. Rina says she is just killing time watching that live, but is surprised when she looks again. Then Shigeru also looks and makes the same shocked face. In the test, the protagonist manages to use the thunder element on the giants and also uses electricity on his demon sword. Then he becomes much stronger and cuts not just one, but all the giants come near. When he crunches, Superyu realizes he won't have the strength to walk back. He defeated the monsters, but he was wrong to push himself too hard. Fortunately for the boy, he wasn't alone. Peleus really went to get reinforcements, and when he found the hero there, he ran to help him. But the protagonist couldn't even talk and was closing his eyes until he fainted. In the entertainment company, there is a tense atmosphere because they stop watching the broadcast. Seijin and John tried to think of a way to comfort the girl, and she seems to be crying. But in reality, her thanks was scarred from embarrassment. She had sent a message to the hero and didn't want him to think it was just business. However, Sagan remembered it was indeed a work contact. Hatsuka shouts that she's much more a fan than a manager, so it's normal. And changing the subject, she says she already told that to the director. The thunder power that only Super Yu had was now his and this new player's. John has no doubt that the boy did something worth paying attention to. Suddenly, Sagan announces that the hero read the email, and Hatsuka almost faints next Sagan. That, unfortunately, the poor girl, he only viewed it, so the girl's enthusiasm went down the drain. On the same day, a streamer specialized in analyzing player combat prepares to work. Hokwai has gained a significant position with his opinions and tutorials on how to defeat enemies. He watches various videos of players with great attention, including Korakawa Amon, who recently entered the blue zone, and also Kazuki, who is now the face of the players, will have his skills analyzed. Hokwai acknowledges that Silver is the legend, and there is no one better to speak of. So he thanks all the viewers for being present and announces that today's topic is about Super Yu. Hokwai goes to see what is happening in the live topics and ends up on the protagonist stream. Even he becomes worried about the hero's ability, who is using his new powers very well. Hokwai explains that the hero is controlling the flow and putting the necessary force into the sword without wasting energy. The streamer can't see anything to criticize and realizes that people don't understand this, and then comments that he will become someone important and that they see be paying attention. In the end, Hokwai almost forgets to use the unique ability, but with Hawkeye's, he says that the boy's control must not be better than Superum's at his peak. The next day, the protagonist wakes up startled. The system warned that stage 6 is still paused and asks if he wants to interrupt the challenge. Even though his fatigue is normal, the hero still feels quite tired. In any case, in the player kit, Superum notices that his audience has increased while he was sleeping, so he apologizes because he will sleep some time to rest in the broadcast. The protagonist teleports to the waiting room, the challenge, and sees Ige ahead. Then another message from Hatsuka arrives, asking him to pay more attention to the proposal. Superum thinks right away that it's spam, but his face changes when he sees that it was sent by the entertainment company Sutin. Later, back in the city, Superum looks at the player kit. He learns about the company that invests in players, which is quite large since it works with entertainment. The affiliated streamer from Southern, Hokwai. Players are heroes so much that it's quite viral. Silver notices that the comment section is a war zone, but he is also happy about the compliment and thanks Hokwai for his good taste. Outside where the protagonist is, Isaac starts to approach. When he hears the news from Hawkeyes about the hero having potential, he gets very angry because the boy is only on the 2nd floor. Isaac has to control himself a lot to avoid losing it, but when he enters a tavern he becomes much happier because he finds the protagonist inside. Isaac tries to talk, but Subaru ignores him, so he goes to the table and throws the hero's hot coffee cup in. After getting a him, the bro apologizes and pretends he is just now seeing the guy. Isaac comments that the 2nd floor is quite a small place, but the hero still doesn't pay attention. Therefore, the blonde asks again for the coffee and the sweets he requested the first time, but he gets furious because Subaru is about to leave. He shouts that he warned last time what would happen if he kept doing this. Then he grabs the protagonist and tells the hero to apologize if he doesn't want to die. But the hero pushes Isaac's hand away and says he doesn't have time for this nonsense anymore. His sway is so hard that the blonde's hind almost broke. This, Cedaru leaves, saying it's his payback for the coffee the other spilled. Isaac tries to stop him, but Subaru doesn't look back and slams the door in ignorance. The blonde confessed that he wanted to climb the tower peacefully, but after being treated like trash like that, he changed his mind because he thought he was being too soft. Outside the cabin, the protagonist looks at the kit and sends a message to someone who will receive it at that wooden house in the forest, because he had sent a message to Rina asking to meet. In a dark cave on the 2nd forest, 7 monsters had been defeated on the protagonist. He prepares to enter the boss room, which is where the Lizard King is hiding. The protagonist's greed bet is already at level 3, so he is getting used to it. Suddenly, a spark of fire turns into a giant lizard called Salamander, which is the boss, and he runs like crazy. To avoid an accident like last time, Supero wanted to test the lightning to see how far he could go. First, he puts the thunder power in his feet and jumps high to cut Salamander. Supero acts like his old body, that the monster unearths a fireball axe to kill the boy before he ascends. Then he puts the thunder power into the demonic sword and cuts the fire, but fatigue rises. Finally, on top of the monster, the protagonist uses all his strength and splits it in 2, finishing the dungeon with a foot on its back. At the dungeon exit, the hero sees that his fatigue is decreasing more slowly and that he still has plenty to spend. The problem was that to increase the greed bet, it was now 40,000 credits. Subaru just wanted someone to show up with a good job for him. But at that moment, a person crew in the back of the forest conned his name. This person was already laughing at him for trying to level up there and said that, despite having known each other since childhood, he is still very surprised. Superum says he is persistent, so Isak quickly states that his patience has limits, and very close to the hero, he comments that he thinks it's better for this to be the last meeting between the two, which makes Subaru curious. Back in the main part of the starting city, the boy with hawk eyes enters a regular wine cellar. Inside, the president of the starting company, Chan, calls for Inzakan sit down to two talk about normal things, like how work is going well. Then Hokwai says it's more or less. However, John says that it's normal and that his audience won't just leave for no reason. Anyway, the two quickly get to the main topic, which isn't just having a cup of tea. The president wants to know about the evaluation Hokwai made of the protagonist. So, as he has already said, he repeats that his talent is greater than Subaru's. John doesn't question his friend's intuition and reveals that he intends to hire him as well. For this reason, the hawk-eyed one says that the president has a good eye for business. After hearing his colleague's evaluation, John is sure he should hire Subaru. Then he asks the streamer to collaborate with the protagonist to increase views. Back to the protagonist fight. Now only the two of them were there, and the hero agreed without fear. Isak starts saying that bad things happen when you enter a dungeon alone. He also mentions that the boy got this far by luck, mocking him for wanting to be Subaru. In fact, the blonde wanted the name of the blue-eyed leader to disappear because everything about him irritated the boy. Subaru feels a bit exhausted, living in a time when everyone has some feelings for him, so he asks why the villain is so obsessed with bothering him. Isak immediately says it's because of the name, but Subaru replies that everyone seems to like his name. To explain, the blonde reminds him that the protagonist knows who his father is, but the hero still doesn't understand. Then Isak says again that he is Reinhardt's son, which makes Subaru remember the saint of the one-edged sword. In the past, the protagonists run this feint and causes a huge uproar. Subaru, from the Blood Guild, had suddenly appeared and defeated the ranker Reinhardt from Runeterra. All of this with just one attack and in less than a second. Then Reinhardt wanted to keep fighting, but after trying to get up, he fell flat on his face. In the present, Isak again shouts for the protagonist not to say his father's name. Superum still tries to understand if the hatred is because of his name or because of his father, and he also tries to explain that Hosoi Superum suffered a lot for having that name. However, the blonde gets tired of listening to this nonsensical conversation and creates a room fire Runga 2. Then, with his hands full of flame magic, wanting to end this quickly, he tells Superum to shut up and just die already. Isak says he hates Superum and also hates how everyone treats him like a god. Although, from what he knows, it's because of him that his guild was exterminated on the 8th floor. Isak says that's what they deserve and hopes they are burning in some hell right now. The blonde throws a fireball saying that the hero's luck ran out when he was born with that name, and it explodes on top of him. Isak huffs in exhaustion, complaining that it didn't control his strength very well. But he's happy just thinking about going after the masked streamer next time. Then, when he hears the word mask, the protagonist emerges from the explosion wearing the mask and asking if they're talking about him. Isak screams that it's impossible for the boy to be fine after taking that fireball to the face, but the protagonist says he doesn't like it when people shout, and even less to hear an idiot like the blonde. Then he punches the boy right in the stomach, making him fall to the ground on his knees. After the hit, Isak can't even speak punctually, so the hero knocks his diss. Isak can't believe this is happening, so Subaru invites the boy to play a game. He asked his colleague to guess if he is Hosoi Subaru or the masked streamer Narukami Subaru, or maybe even the real Narukami Subaru from the Blue-Eyed Guild. Isak starts to understand that the protagonist is the famous boy from the streams, but for a loser like him to get the thunder element, he doesn't think it's a big deal. He says that nobody like the hero won't be able to win at this level, and because of that, he says it means he is superior to the real Subaru of the blue eyes. Isak lunges at the protagonist, exploding with rage, but now Subaru reacts brutally, cutting the boy's arm. While the blonde tries to understand, the protagonist asks how he is so confident. Isak is still very confused, but then he starts to remember when Subaru talked about Hosoi's suffering as if he were another person, and he ends up discovering that the protagonist is the real Subaru. But it didn't help to find out before being completely cut off. With 2 strikes, the fight was over and blonde passed out. Then the hero said that this would be his thank you for borrowing Hosola's body. In a regular restaurant, people comment on having a super fan there. They feel secondhand embarrassment and see that he is doing a live stream. After thinking a lot, the hero understood that wearing this mask all the time was good, so enemies wouldn't know his identity. And finally, the person he was waiting for appeared. Hatsuka says it's a pleasure to meet him and mentions that she was the one who sent the message. Then she introduces herself but can't help but show that she's embarrassed, that she shakes the crank butt. And the girl sees that the boy looks a lot like the real Superyu, as if he had come back to life and was hiding his face with the mask. Superyu asks if something is wrong, and the girl almost explodes with embarrassment, especially since she remembers that the boss said she had to make a good impression and was already messing up. She starts scratching her head out of stress, Then the protagonist strikes up a conversation asking if she's a fan of Subaru. As Hatsuka says yes, the hero tries to downplay himself, but she also mentions if she's a fan of him. Hatsuka proudly says that, in fact, she had been watching his live since there was no one else, and that she was also very worried when he entered the giant's trial. In any case, the protagonist thanks her for her support. Hatsuka starts to say that it was destiny, and that's why she sent a message through the company's profile. Anyway, the girl controls herself to be more professional and talks more about the contract. From commercials to events, she says the company will do everything possible for the hero's brand, and what he has to do in return she keeps saying. Subaru asks if every streamer has such a good life, but the girl explains that he is special. Anyway, he interrupts Hatsuka, talking about the conditions to ask if all the managers are also like her. Then the girl tries to say that they are better because she doesn't know if he is liking it or hating it. While the girl thought she was in trouble, Subaru was just seeing that her level was high. That's why he stayed quiet, because if a company manager was so strong, he had to become much more powerful. Hatsuka becomes increasingly sad, with soulmatic Pacalbanist if thinks it can trust her, and he extends his hand to formalize a contract with the Suiton Entertainment Company. Then the girl thanks him for his trust, almost crying with emotion. The next day, the protagonist opens a live stream and 703 people join to watch. He goes crazy that the views increase so much overnight, but Hatsuka was working for that, so he called the audience to have fun with the show he is going to give. The protagonist starts the 6th stage called Legend of the Thunder Path. On a rainy day, inside a tent, the group of Nats is preparing a plan to advance farther. Pellies asks if the protagonist is already there. Then Falcon says no. Another one asks if they can trust him, and Akali says it's hard to believe that a foreigner defeated the giant chief alone. 2 more say that the blonde can't be that naive if he didn't see him fighting. But Pellies shouts for the 2 to stop talking nonsense, and just when they were talking about Subaru, the boy appears. Pellies immediately goes to check if he is okay, then the hero says he is fine. In the eyes of the others, the protagonist Mas is quite suspicious. The hero realizes that the others don't believe he defeated the giant. He remembers that Hatsuka agreed to make a position to mute his microphone, so he only tells the NPCs that they are being very arrogant. Before anything else, an older knight thanks him, saying his name is Dale. Subaru says it's a pleasure, and the old man says he was defending the village when they were attacked by him. The hero immediately asks if there is anyone more powerful than the chief. The old man says that the true giants who once fought against the gods are sealed somewhere in the Shapir. So, those that exist now are remnants of what were the best. However, Dale almost goes crazy talking about the giant that appeared after the hero killed the chief. A very heavy atmosphere fills the room, but the protagonist thinks it's simple to fight against him. Dale doesn't have the courage to ask for help and says that the hero is confident because he hasn't seen him yet. Pellias even shouts at Subaru, saying there is a legend that at the top of the Millennium Mountain, there is a hidden thunder fragment. And the legend also says that the one he must frang to fragment is the benefactor of the village. A few days later, another village catches fire, and people run from several giants in despair. The leader of the giants there speaks as if he has seen his son and picks up a knight from the ground. Then, with him in the palm of his hand, he simply crushes him into a pulp and says he will avenge his son with human blood. Superhero is already very close to the chaos and sees the monster in the city after descending the mountain. The Czech gets a bit scared because the giant looks like a crazy psychopath. Going back in time, the blonde said it would take 3 days for the giants to arrive and told Subaru to flee if he couldn't find the fragment. So, the hero went to the Millennium Mountain to try to find the power of thunder. But he wasn't afraid because he trusted he could overcome any challenge. The problem was that this catchphrase was the same one he used before, so the chat noticed the reference. Some supporters of the protagonist set missions worth credit for him. Anyway, the young man continues riding his horse until he reaches where the blonde said one of the thunder fragments should be hidden. Our hero stops when a huge stone wall blocks the way, then he starts to search. Pellies said that the fragment was passed down through legends, but he didn't even know what it was. Unfortunately, the blonde also didn't know how to obtain the power, but he was sure that whoever controlled the thunder would be able to defeat the giants. In the human world, Hatsuka shouts to the boss in happiness that he closed a contract. Then, he laughs a lot and says that the girl has finally become a decent person. Hatsuka thanks him but also asks if she wasn't good until now. Anyway, John informs that he met with the hawk-eyed man and hangs up, saying the young man will get in touch. As soon as the work ends, the girl lies on her bed happily to watch the hero's live stream. Watching him on screen and working personally was her dream come true. The girl caught the broadcast just as the protagonist said that catchphrase, but she was surprised as said anything else, because she found it strange for him to say that so naturally. At the top of the mountain, the protagonist activates the thunder power and everyone thinks he is nervous. The hero made a hole in the stone wall, but he didn't stop. He continues and punches harder, creating an explosion of lightning. Then, he feels happy because he can finally find something important. Everyone in the chat asks what is happening with the hero. only he was feeling that a thunder power was calling the thunder within his body, and this power was behind a door, he was scour in the money, and he moves forward. The chat discusses that the protagonist doesn't have a key to open it. However, he extends his hand, and as soon as he touches the stone, some lightning appears. Then, once again, the protagonist gathers electric power in his hand and clenches his fists to attack. He already knew the secret to open the door, so instead of looking for a key, he simply tried to break it down. When the protagonist's selector power touches the door, it reacts, trembling all over, and like a magic trick, the door by itself for a Heir to Andric thing. He takes a deep breath and walks to face the final challenge, and when he passes through the gates, they lock the boy in until he finishes. In that tent where the protagonist was, everyone continues discussing some strategies. The old man asks if the blonde really thinks the hero will obtain the power of thunder. Then, he says yes without even thinking. Dale says that the leader puts a lot of trust in him, but for Peleus, there was no reason to doubt. Suddenly, a person appears, shouting that everyone will die even if Subaru succeeds. He trembles in fear on his knees and says that the colleagues there don't know the power of the giant they will face. Peleus goes to the boy asking if they should give up then. The blonde really wants to believe in the protagonist because they were saved by him once. However, the boy says it's easy for Peleus to say that when he hasn't seen the monster. Out of nowhere, the tent starts to shake, and things from the tables begin to fall. Then, a knight enters the place shouting that the enemy is here, which takes everyone by surprise because they didn't expect them to arise so quickly. Inside the cave that the protagonist opened, he walks trying to find what the test wants him to do. Some say it doesn't seem to have anything, and a few mention interesting things, like how thunder can be so fast that it can't be seen. Subaru then starts trying to find something he isn't seeing. He closes his eyes, remembering that the name of the challenge is Thunder Path. The strongest power he was feeling was coming from beneath his feet, so he had an idea. He picks up a stone from the ground and throws it far away with all his strength. As an electricity disperses the air, it becomes invisible to the human eye. But the further it goes, the stronger it gets. Then, the protagonist's stone is destroyed a few steps ahead. Even knowing it's a test, the only choice he has is to keep moving forward. Then, the hero thinks it must be some kind of cruel endurance challenge, where if he can't pass, he will die. Several people give missions to the protagonist, and some talent to stop to avoid dying. But he thanks them and continues on. In the forest cabin, while preparing dinner, Shiguro looks at the poor cat with gay Tankson. So much so that when Rina appears, she jumps from her chair in fright. Rina is startled too, then asks if her friend was watching something suspicious. Obviously, Shiguro says no, and that she's just a bit tired. Rina, in turn, teases her by saying that hair usually grows more on perverts. In fact, since she was banned from watching streams, the girl had been bored, but Rina became curious because it seemed like she was being kicked off the couch. Shiguro gets so anxious that she was a loud house shirring. She tells the girl to rest somewhere else and to stop meddling in everything she does while turning off the kid's sound. Anyway, Rina feels uncomfortable there and gets up from the couch to leave. Since she crossed the line, the friend says the other can stay a bit longer and eat, but Rina slams the door in Shiburu's face in anger. In any case, now Shigure can go back to watching the stream she was on, because if Rina had seen that she was watching this, it would have caused trouble. The girl thinks that even if they were different, Shiburu would have forgot that. And it catches her attention how the protagonist behaves just like the leader, except for the part where he seems desperate for credits. In the end, the girl got distracted, so Rina's hand touched Sugar's shoulder asking if she thought she would notice. And just by the girl's expression, it was clear that she was furious. In the Thunderpath cave, the protagonist continues to proceed very carefully, but there comes a time when he starts getting electrocuted, and his progress is only at 2.3%. Subaru can only endure because he feels a familiar sensation, as he had to deal with this several times in the past. With 3.2% progress, it becomes clear that he still has a long journey ahead, but he pushes on because now that he knows the objective, he just needs to be resilient enough. The people in the chat don't understand why he isn't running, because they aren't feeling his pain. Obviously, reaching the goal is the main thing, but if possible, the hero still wants to explore something else in the cave. Watching the stream from his home, Hawkeyes pays close attention to everything. He remembers the Jones and the Calavre, and that was something a boss didn't do. John mentioned that when it came to succeeding in a stream, it was only possible to control half of the things. Hokoi knew that popularity would be measured by the types of players that existed. Super-S stream felt less like a veteran talking to fans and more like a calm vlog. Narakami was still a beginner streamer, so Hokoi just needed to do what he knew. This was a chance to ride a meteor coming at high speed, and make him a shining star in the sky. People said that Hokoi stayed in the analyses because it didn't have the comfings to climb the tower. But the truth was that, like everyone else, he also wanted to reach for the stars. For a moment, he began to dream of being like Subaru and lost a bit of focus on the stream. He gets scared and quickly goes back to work, but sees that he missed something very important. Back to the protagonist's stream. He is still walking, but the closer he gets to the end, the more injuries he has. Superim doesn't stop or complains of pain. Instead, he walks and endures everything in silence. It is said that the most powerful lightning is the one that penetrates deepest into the body. Now the hero has walked enough to have electricity within his heart and meridians. With progress at around 20%, the meridians are opened and the hero gains a point of magical power. Random meridians are concepts of power, and just as the smaller meridians are like veins running through the body, opening them is like unclogging the entrances. In other words, the power of thunder entered the protagonist's entire body.
And that wraps up today's journey through the realm. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to pain face and comment your favorite moment and subscribe to become a true realm warrior.